Between the demo version of Lies of P on the Xbox Series and the final version on the Xbox Series, there's a big difference. The demo version has a very washed out picture in regards to HDR, a lot of HDR Black Level Raise. The final version, on the other hand, it appears to me that we have actually some sort of black level crush. Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. When we're looking a little bit closer on the Xbox Series version, and yeah, in regards to the console version, that's the only version I can test actually. We're talking about the PC version a little bit later, but I don't have the PlayStation 5 version. But again, let's have a closer look on the Xbox Series version in regards to HDR between the demo version and the final version. And the first thing what I found is when I started the final version, the HDR Black Level Raise is actually gone. But on the other hand, I found the picture now a little bit too dark, slightly too dark maybe, compared to the demo version for sure. So I mean, just compare those two pictures at the moment and you can see what I'm talking about. The demo version is clearly washed out and how should I say, the game looks, or the whole picture looks very foggy compared to the final version. On the other hand, the final version in my opinion is missing some sort of details in very dark areas. But I would say let's start from the very beginning, and yeah, unfortunately this game does not support the HDR system level calibration. Not on the Xbox Series X and not on the PC version. I'm not quite sure about the PlayStation 5 version, but I'm very sure it is also not supported. So let's take a closer look on the HDR settings, what we have in the game on the PC and the Xbox Series, and I'm very sure the same is on the PlayStation 5, or we have the same settings on the PlayStation 5. We have HDR on off of course, and we have brightness and contrast, so there's no settings actually for the maximum peak brightness in this game, which is a little bit of a downside because I mentioned already that this game does not support the HDR system level calibration on the Xbox and PC. That means we can't actually change the maximum peak brightness and specular highlights. And what I found is that the maximum peak brightness and specular highlights is around 1300-1400 nits. That was the maximum what I was able to find, at least where I tested the game. So the problem now what we have is that some TVs are not capable of providing or actually outputting 1300-1400 nits. My LG G2 for an example is just capable of outputting 1000 nits. That means 1300 nits is slightly too much, which, don't get me wrong, is not a big problem because most of the time you're not focusing on specular highlights. But if you would focus on them, then you would most likely see some clipping because of the too much brightness what the game is asking for. But let's return to the settings what we have in the game, and we have the brightness setting and we have contrast setting. But what I found so far is that I wouldn't touch contrast at all because it will just destroy the nice picture what you have actually with the standard settings. The only thing what I would do actually on the Xbox Series and most likely on the PlayStation 5 as well, PC is a different story, I would most likely increase the brightness setting on the Xbox or console version to actually get a little bit more details in very dark areas. But you should be very careful when you increase any slider, especially the brightness slider can lead to a very washed out picture. So let me just show you one example here. Right now everything is set to standard factory setting. That means I haven't touched brightness or contrast at all. And when we look in this corner and we just checking actually for any HDR Black Level Raise, you can see that the histogram is actually telling us that at some point we're reaching perfect black actually. It's almost a little bit too much black in my opinion. So, but the problem now is if we now go ahead and we're going to increase this by, let's say, just one little tick, then it's maybe right now here in this corner really good, but the rest of the game maybe is already a little bit washed out. So very hard to recommend something. I have the feeling that maybe yes, you clip a couple of darker areas, or you have a little bit of black level crush with the standard setting, but in general I have the feeling that this game in regards of the HDR Black Level Raise and in regards of HDR in general on the console version, on the Xbox version, is very well optimized with the standard factory settings. And when you now play on an LG OLED TV, you have of course the option between HGiG, dynamic tone mapping off and on. And yeah, as always, my recommendation is do not use dynamic tone mapping off, because you will just lose a lot of nice details in specular highlights. The difference between dynamic tone mapping on and HGiG is, as always, in games like that, where we're talking about very dark games, actually, it's very significant, the difference. As you can see here, it's really up to you what you prefer more. HGiG is just a more accurate way to display HDR or to display the picture right now, but dynamic tone mapping on can help you of course to see more details, or if you play in a brighter room. This setting is absolutely up to you. And of course on the Xbox Series X we have Dolby Vision for gaming. Between Dolby Vision and HDR10 or HGiG, you shouldn't expect too much of a difference, because this game does not support Dolby Vision natively. The only time when you see actually a difference between Dolby Vision and HDR10 in this game, this is most likely because of different picture settings on your TV, because Dolby Vision, if it is not natively supported, will use the HDR10 metadata. So you can see there is no additional or different information compared to HDR10. So before we're now talking about the PC version, let's summarize my recommended settings for the Xbox version and most likely for the PlayStation 5 version as well. But please keep in mind, I can't verify the PlayStation 5 version. So in regards of settings, there is not much what we actually should change in my opinion. The only thing what you can actually change is the brightness setting slightly. Just increase it a little bit if you think you have some sort of black level crush, but I wouldn't touch contrast at all, because I found the standard factory setting is really good. So I already told you that between HGiG dynamic tone mapping on, there is a big difference in terms of the average picture brightness. This is as always up to you. The only downside what we have on in terms of settings in the game is that we can't change the maximum peak brightness in specular highlights, which is now at this very moment limited to maximum 1000 nits, but most of the time specular highlights like this are actually around 1000 nits, which of course is perfect for an LG G2, but of course not ideal for a TV like the S95C or the LG G3. And now I would say let's start talking about the PC version. And what I found is that HDR looks pretty good in this game. As you can see on the histogram at the moment, maximum peak brightness is around 1000 nits, sometimes a little bit more. It's exactly the same as on the console version. There's no setting what we have where we can actually change the HDR or the specular highlights in terms of brightness. And this is the same downside actually what we have on the console version, but in general it makes a very good impression. When we're now talking about the HDR Black Level Raise, it is actually on a great level. I found it is slightly, we have a little bit HDR Black Level Raise, maybe very minor, but when we have a look here right now in this very dark part here from this game, we actually at some point reaching here. Can you see this? This is actually almost zero. That means it is on a very great level. So I wouldn't change, and when we look here right now, we have actually zero. I wouldn't change anything on the settings. So this right now is with standard factory settings in terms of contrast and brightness. And as I said also, or already in the Xbox version, it seems to, or it appears to me that the settings, the standard factory settings are very well optimized, and the same counts for the PC version. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the HDR Black Level Raise or HDR Black Level Floor on the PC version. And I did exactly the same test when I talked about the Xbox version. And the difference is here on the PC version with the standard factory setting, we are actually not reaching zero HDR Black Level Floor. That means we have slightly increased black levels. So don't get me wrong, this might be absolutely correct because the game doesn't want to display perfect black at the moment. But when we compare this with the Xbox version, you can actually see there is a difference because the Xbox version reached 0 here. But to be very honest, I like it on the PC version a little bit better because you can see slightly more details. And for the Xbox version, I mentioned already, you can, if you like, increase the brightness setting slightly. But on the PC version, I found the brightness and contrast setting is really very well optimized. I wouldn't touch it at all. And then of course, last but not least, also on the PC version, if you're playing the game on an LG OLED TV, we have the option dynamic tone mapping on, HGiG or dynamic tone mapping off. And as for the console version, the same recommendation here, do not use dynamic tone mapping off because you will lose a lot of fine details in specular highlights. The main difference between dynamic tone mapping on and HGiG, as you can see here, is the average picture brightness, and in specular highlights with dynamic tone mapping on, you have more clipping. Okay my friends, so that's it for this video. I say thank you very much for watching me, and please do me a favor, like, share and subscribe if you're new to my channel. And if you think we can use different settings, because we have so many different monitors, TVs out there, and it is always very hard to recommend something. But to be very honest, for this game there is, in my opinion, not much to recommend. The only thing what we probably would need in a future update is maybe a brightness slider for the specular highlights to set the maximum peak brightness, or maybe the support for the system level calibration on the PC and the Xbox and PlayStation. But that's all. In terms of the HDR implementation, I think there is a big step forward. The demo version was, at least on the Xbox version, or on the Xbox where I tested the demo version back then, was very washed out, and I was not happy at all with the HDR implementation here. This is a very nice surprise, and I have to say, this is exactly what we like to see. Kudos to the developer, really, they did a great job with fixing or implementing HDR in the final version in the right way. Really, really good. I like it. Thank you very much for joining me and watching me. I see you guys next time. Bye.